Here's what's coming up on the world today. All American adults will receive the COVID-19 vaccine by the end of May, says U.S. President Joe Biden. COVID-19 vaccines reach more countries in Africa. Plus, more deadly clashes reported in Myanmar between protesters and the police. Well, welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thank you for joining us. I'm Amarachi Ubadi in Lagos. We begin with the coronavirus pandemic in the United States, a country with the highest number of cases and deaths from the pandemic. But President Joe Biden is providing some hope for those who will take it, promising that the United States is well on track with its vaccine campaign and that there would be enough vaccines for every adult in the country by the end of May. There will be a number of vaccines available, such as the Johnson & Johnson single-shot COVID-19 vaccine, in addition to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. He's confident of delivering 100 million doses in 100 days.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May. By the end of May. That's progress, important progress.
As he hopes life will be back to normal by March next year, but wants the public to remain vigilant about the coronavirus.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we cannot let our guard down now or assure that victory is inevitable. We can't assume that. We must remain vigilant, act fast and aggressively, and look out for one another. That's how we're going to get ahead of this virus, get our economy going again, and get back to our loved ones.
The VOA's White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman joins us now. He's in Alexandria, Virginia. Steve, great to see you on the program. It's no secret the president is eager to get vaccinations over and done with as soon as possible. But vaccinating every adult by the end of May, how does he achieve this, considering the roadblocks about the coronavirus in some states in the U.S.?
It's a great question, and it does look like that by the end of the May, as the president pointed out, that there will be enough doses. But as he expressed in his remarks yesterday, I was in the room when he was talking about this, there is a concern about having enough vaccinators, as he called them, that they've got to bring out an extra corps of people relying on retired doctors and nurses and others to actually get these shots in the arm. So that's going to be the real challenge, is assembling enough bodies in so many places to make sure that every adult in the United States is vaccinated by the end of May.
Before now, Steve, the president had asked people to wear masks for the first 100 days of his administration, but you still have states like Texas and others already calling off wearing of face masks and calling off some COVID-19 restrictions. And then there is also talk about a possible fourth surge of coronavirus. What are those who have the president's ear at this moment saying to him about these developments?
Well, they are absolutely concerned, but it's a real question as to what the president can do besides just his rhetoric. There is a federal mask mandate, but it covers only what the federal government has jurisdiction over, such as being on airplanes and trains, interstate transportation, because like in Nigeria, we have a federal system of government here in the United States. So the individual states have tremendous rights and privileges. Now, what we're seeing happen in places like Texas and Louisiana, these states where the governors have made a big deal about 100% back to business and lifting the mask mandates right away, is you have individual businesses saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't care what the governor says. If you want to come into our store or our restaurant, you're going to have to wear a mask for a little bit longer.
And in the midst of the U.S. vaccine rollouts, there have been calls to Western countries such as the United States to help out poorer nations with vaccines, especially if they have in excess. Has the president addressed this as well?
Well, this has been a question that's been put to the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, almost every day. And she's been very forthright in her answers, saying the priority of the president is to first vaccinate all the adult Americans, and then we will help the rest of the world. And she notes that through the World Health Organization and other groups that the United States is contributing money to help others get vaccinated. But this was something that came up in the meetings with the virtual meetings with both the presidents, the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Mexico, where they're asking for help with vaccine doses from the United States. And Biden is holding firm, saying, you know, we're not going to be sending supplies over the border just yet.
Well, Steve, thanks again for bringing us up to speed on this, and do stay safe in Virginia.
Thank you.
A Catholic church in Tanzania says nuns and priests have been dying from the coronavirus despite the country downplaying its presence. A church which has been outspoken about the coronavirus before, in one of the few countries in the world not to publish its virus data, warned Tanzanians to take COVID-19 precautions more seriously after it said 60 nuns and 25 priests had died in the last 2 months. Now, the president has previously played down the virus and refused to take measures to curb its spread. And last month, the health minister said the country had no plans to vaccinate. Here's more in our global update.
Rwanda has received a batch of 240,000 doses of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine today. The shots are from the Serum Institute of India, so says the health ministry. The country intends to begin vaccinations from Friday, prioritizing front health workers and others at high risk, hoping to vaccinate 30% of its roughly 12 billion people before the end of the year. Meanwhile, Kenya's first batch of COVID-19 vaccines also arrived in the country today, with the first priority being given to healthcare and frontline workers, as the country's vaccination campaign is set to be rolled out. The East African country will aim to vaccinate 1.25 million people in the first phase by June this year, but the target could change depending on the availability of more vaccines. South Korea is investigating the death of 2 people, both with pre-existing health conditions, who died within days of receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine. A 63-year-old home patient with cerebrovascular disease developed symptoms including high fever after being given the vaccines 4 days ago. He died after showing symptoms of blood poisoning and pneumonia. Another nursing home patient in his 50s with a cardiac disorder and diabetes died today after suffering multiple heart attacks, having received the vaccine a day earlier. Finally, the U.S. state of Texas has lifted the state's mask mandate, allowing businesses to open at full capacity. The United States reported a 3% decline in new cases of COVID-19 last week, a much smaller drop than in the previous 6 weeks, and health officials warned that progress against the global pandemic was stalling. 29 of 50 states reported more new infections last week compared to the previous 7 days, whereas only 7 states in the previous week reported weekly increase.
So To other stories now, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has condemned the murder of Saudi journalist JAMAL Khashoggi. He made the announcement before Parliament today, saying Britain is following a long-standing set of rules and conventions on arms sales.
Speaker, we could condemn the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. We continue to call for a full investigation into the causes of his death, and indeed we have already sanctioned 20 people, Mr. Speaker, in Saudi Arabia. And I repeat the point that I have made, that the UK government continues to follow the consolidated guidance, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, was set up by the Labour Party.
More deadly clashes are taking place in Myanmar, with 10 people killed at least today. There have also been reports of further deaths in cities around the country, though they have not been confirmed.
Security forces and protesters faced off in Mandalay today, with protesters using a fire extinguisher to hold cover and throwing objects towards the police. Protests against the military since the coup on February 1 have shown no signs of stopping across the country as the Southeast Asian neighbors struggle for consensus in their efforts to end the month-long crisis. People came to the aid of a man who appeared wounded in Yangon, carrying him into the back of a medical vehicle and then clearing away debris in its path. It came as witnesses and the media reported that security forces shot and killed 9 people during the protest. At least 30 people have been killed since the coup. As the protest wore on in the city, people tried to douse a fire burning in the street, sending black smoke into the sky, and tear gas sent people running. Security forces have resorted to live fire with little warning in several towns and cities.
While the European Union says it is united in its sanctions against Russia over its treatment of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, Russian and Eastern European studies expert Angela Stent says the Kremlin clearly sees Navalny as a threat. The sanctions imposed even by the United States are unlikely to trigger his release or affect the treatment he receives in labor camp where he has been sentenced. The sanctions against senior Russian officials, among them the head of its FSB security forces, and on 14 entities, marked a sharp departure from former President Donald Trump's reluctance to confront Russian President Vladimir Putin. Stent believes the sanctions would have to be all-encompassing to have any effect because the West has very little leverage with Russia, which she says is able to sustain itself with its robust energy and arms sales.
The U.S. imposed these sanctions on some top Russian sort of security-connected officials and some Russian entities that could have been involved in some of these actions. Partly, as did the European Union, partly because it's important symbolically to show that there has to be some consequences for poisoning and then arresting and jailing Alexei Navalny. But I don't think it's clear that these kinds of sanctions are going to have any impact on the way Navalny is treated, how long he stays in jail, or what happens to him. Because the Russian government, the Kremlin particularly, feels threatened by him. They want him in prison, or they wanted him to stay out of the country, and these sanctions aren't going to change that.
You're still watching The World Today. Still ahead on the program. What do you say to when a billionaire offers you a spot on a ride to the moon? Well, think about your answer when we return. Welcome back. German media is reporting the country's intelligence services have designated the Alternative for Germany Party, the AfD, as a suspected extremist group. The Nationalist Party is already under surveillance in a number of German states, but the decision means its activities can be observed nationwide. However, MPs and members of the European Parliament will be excluded from any operations. The intelligence services have not publicly commented on the reports. An AFD spokeswoman described the decision as purely political and said the party will take legal action against unjustified classification. And we've confirmed it will be the first time in post-war history that a political party which seats in the national parliament has received the designation. Australia's Attorney General Christian Porter, the country's chief law officer, has identified himself as the subject of a historical rape allegation, declaring his innocence and strongly denying the claim. Politicians who last week received an anonymous allegation of an assault in 1988 had referred material to federal police. On Tuesday, police in New South Wales state, where the alleged assault occurred, said there was insufficient evidence to investigate the claim and close the matter.
The only thing that I can say, and likely the only thing that I'm ever going to be able to say, and it's the truth, and that is that nothing in the allegations that have been printed ever happened. Even now, the only information I have about the allegations is what has been circulating online and in certain media outlets. I think that she was sick.
Thousands of Central African Republic refugees are living in makeshift shelters, also struggling to care for their families in hard-to-reach areas close to the border in the Democratic Republic of Congo. UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency, is working to relocate the refugees to safer sites where they can better receive humanitarian assistance as well as protection.
Thousands of Central African Republic refugees at this hard-to-reach camp in the Democratic Republic of Congo are sleeping out in the open in makeshift shelters. They have little or no access to sanitation, drinking water and food. Authorities in the DRC estimate that there are 92,000 Central African refugees there after election-linked violence erupted in December last year. Some have been welcomed by host families. Reports indicate that up to 3 refugee families are living in a single small home in the remote border areas. Okipo is one refugee enduring the dire conditions.
When we arrived, our living conditions were difficult. Finding food was difficult. We couldn't go back there because night and day there was a sound of gunfire. It is not possible to go back there because if you go back there and things happen again and it finds you there, what will you say? We will endure here until God touches someone's heart to help us.
The UN Refugee Agency is trying to establish the number of new arrivals and to identify those with specific needs or vulnerabilities. It's working to relocate refugees to safer sites where they can better receive humanitarian assistance and protection. Nearly a third of the Central African Republic's population of 4.7 million have been forced to flee after years of on-off conflict. The gold and diamond-rich country has failed to find stability since the 2013 rebellion. The UN says nearly half of the national territory is occupied by armed groups.
And do you fancy an all-expenses-paid trip to the moon? I know I would, well, if I'm in the right frame of mind. But you might get lucky, though, as the Japanese billionaire Yusaku Misawa has launched a search for 8 people to join him as the first private passengers on a trip around the moon with Elon Musk's SpaceX. He had originally planned to invite artists for the week-long voyage slated for 2023. The reject plan to invite the Reject project will give more people from around the world the chance to join the journey. And if you see yourself as an artist, then you are an artist, says Misawa in a promotional video that was released earlier today about, the planned trip. The first stage of the selection process runs until March 14th, with applicants needing to pass medical checks and eventually an interview with Misawa himself. The entrepreneur, who sold his online fashion business Zozo Incorporated SoftBank in 2019, is paying the entire cost of the voyage on SpaceX's next-generation reusable launch vehicle, dubbed the Starship.
What's really significant about the Dear Moon mission is that it'll be the first private space flight, first commercial space flight with humans beyond Earth orbit. So this has never occurred before, and in fact, we're going to go past the moon. So it will actually end up being further. This mission, we expect people will go further than any human has ever gone from planet Earth.
Wow, a trip to go where no man has gone before. I wonder if there is a return flight back. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.